All right. Hello. Hi, how are you? Oh, Ashu and Jess. Hello. All right. Okay. Let's wait for Jesse to come back. Yes. Hello.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. We'll wait for Jess to come back. We'll get started. There we go.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. All right. So welcome. So today, what do we want to do? What do we have on the agenda?
Um, I don't have any super interesting updates. I have a few I can share generally, and I don't know if you wanted to. I assume you mostly wanted to go through like community period onboarding stuff. Um, but I have a few light updates other than that.
Yeah, we can go through some of that later. If you wanted to start off and tell us, you know, whatever it is that you wanted to cover, and that's good.
Um, in like super broad network space, I was at. Let me see if I can pull this up properly. I was at an event. There used to be a bunch of like Ecolopto salons quite a bit last year, and they mostly died down this year because Addie's building out a few other things. I don't know if Morgan was there or not for. Oh, geez. There we go. Put this away. I don't know. I don't think Morgan showed up at the one yesterday or not. It was kind of an unusual time, middle of the day. But just to mention this. There we go. This was interesting. It was. Oh, I think they changed the title of this. Okay, it
Oh,
is. Yeah. Okay, I'm not. It was sort of about. So there was I guess Lupe Fiasco is a renowned artist and rapper, was at MIT recently, and Addie has a big history in rap and stuff. We won't get into that, but it was a really interesting discussion from Elon, who's doing a lot in sort of his autoregressive theory of mind stuff, which is very interesting and still figuring out some things about that. He writes a lot on Substack about that. But it was a very interesting discussion yesterday at the event. And without getting into it, um, there was a lot of stuff about both embodiment and also sort of some interesting takes on, for lack of better terms, computation. And there's talk about a cultural computing perspective about it. So there may be a future event coming that way soon, and I'm trying to pitch something for Joe Pro and maybe Orthogonal Lab about um, kind of the Diginess digital narratives reflective agency or cognitive sovereignty about how um, ideas are generated, let's say, um, and fitting into that. So that's one thing, and then there's a lot in terms of uh, launching Joe Pro's website, which is like live-ish now, and there's a lot happening, but it's finally becoming upgraded into a little bit more functional stuff. So that's a lot's happening there. I'm going through. Um, let me see. Let me see if I can. Oh, I just did a lot of stuff here. If I get the history page. I don't know if the history page is going to work right yet. But suffice to say, I think we talked last time about talking to many of the alumni of Google Summer of Code. I don't know if anyone will be joining us today. I know Sarah said she might be here today. But Sarah and VD and Hul and um, even I reached out to a couple folks like remember Rish? I
yeah,
just
yeah.
saw his stuff.
Rashab.
Rashib, yeah. and I have to reach out to him proper. But like, it was very interesting to see everybody from the past, and I'm going to. I don't have any major updates with them, but we'll continue to basically mention them in the sense of, um, if there's something we want to specifically do or reach out to them, I'm up for doing that because it might be a very interesting to do. Maybe especially during like the later parts of the community period, or just some other time later in the summer.
Yeah.
Um, Outside of that, I'm going to try to pull off something, but I don't suspect it's going to work properly right now.
Okay.
Uh, yeah. Mm, no, it won't look right. Mostly this. It's been an incredibly busy week, and there's incredibly little to visibly show. But sometimes that's how it goes, you know. So a lot's been happening organizationally. A lot's been happening going through past stuff. A lot's been happening in terms of trying to sort out all the different things. The lab, like it's kind of doing a kind of auditing or not really auditing, more inventory of everything that's been going on in this lab, Google Summer of Code, and like the Devo worm related stuff. Is like, oh, like it's quite a lot when you actually get it all in one spot. So trying to
Yeah.
just process that and see everything and then build out some very specific uh, projects. The last thing I'll say before I kind of step off this is, do you remember me talking? It it was something I originally wrote in 2024, which is almost basically 2 years now proper. But it was like the scaffolding and vantage points essay, or like the scaffolding and vantage points. It was something I referenced conceptually a lot at that time. But I never like openly published anything. But I found that again, and that will be something that I'm fleshing out in terms of some other things that are coming. So
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that. That's my opening up going open things going on. I don't know. I don't think we had a Devo Warm meeting this week, but I think you said we're going to do it next Monday as well. Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So we haven't had it run for the last 2 weeks, and that's just because I've not been available to do that. But it's back next this coming week. So thanks for bearing with me on that. And so yeah, we'll have that. Of course, we have the open source meetings on Fridays, and we have our Saturday meeting on Saturdays. So that's continuing to go well. And yeah, it was, you were mentioning about the website. It's very tantalizing to think about what's going to come from that. Um, yeah, so I'm looking forward to seeing that. Now, one of the things about organizations and community is like keeping websites updated. It might sound kind of silly, but it's not because it's kind of your archive of things. Same thing with a GitHub repository, or even if you're an individual student or academic or professional, you're going to maintain some sort of record of what you've done. And so trying to come up with ways to do that and be up to date, and and then be in ways that you can describe to other people, because when you put it up publicly, you want to have a public face and say, this is what I've done, this is what and then you can show people what you've done. You can show them kind of how it's relevant to maybe your overall experience or what you've done overall. And it's hard to get that exactly right. um, So, if you're writing a CV, sometimes it's good to have like, a list of publications or a list of projects or a list of repositories that you've worked on. But other times it's good to have a narrative CV or a sort of a narrative where you can go through and say, I did this for like 2 years, this project, this is what I got out of it. And then, have maybe, because you can put it, say, on the web or something, you can have demos associated with it. You can have other materials that you wouldn't necessarily get from a static list of things. So I value that kind of presentation in that form where you have like a place where everyone can go see what's going on and understand kind of how it's related to everything else and so forth.
I think, and this is maybe something that could even, I'm trying to think of a way that would be useful to this group. And there are ways to do that. So maybe future sort of programming or future discussion will specifically be about basically what Bradley just said. Because from my my perspective has changed quite a bit. I would say when I, because in the last 5 6 years, I had went back to school, finished undergraduate degree, did a bunch of other stuff, and then also got a master's degree, and now I'm doing stuff with Pro and built out all these things. So before that time period, my only experience with academic websites and lab websites was I go to them, 95% of them are outdated. Um, like by 1 or 2 years. Most of them have a professor of the PI in the lab that looks like 20 years old or like 40 or 50 years old. And it's like, is that the same guy or girl, whoever? And you're not sure, like, you're like, and it's like, what the hell? Like, why don't they, why are these websites so bad? And now on the other side of it, it's like, I understand it. So it's sort of like a very much if you know situation where until you try to maintain this thing that has, as Bradley said, a kind of coherent public face. And this kind of is in the same line of like demo or die or pitching or this sort of kind of science communication ish. Although there's sort of there's sort of this new wave of like just saying whatever on YouTube or whatever, like incoherently presenting something. But in a conventional sense, the art of presenting something generally coherent, but still essentially an abstraction to the public, and then having enough, like, the balance between what that image is and then the minutia and the details of building out your project. And it could be software, it could be ideas, it could be trying to document software, it could be trying to document ideas. Like that's really a really tough space, and I guess it's really a kind of a skill you can develop too. So how do you do that, and how do you convey kind of like what level are you talking at in terms of trying to present something of some level of coherence to people? Um, but yeah, like in a little bit more concrete, applicable sense, tailoring CVs, having a website, like it's very big right now that you have something. When people look for you on the internet, you got to have something to point to. So what is that? And how it can be, it's better, it's if you don't have something that's not good, and if you have something that's somewhat untailored, that's potentially worse. so, so it's sort of this mix of like, do you post something and do you have something updated, and like what's like the minimum, we talk about like minimum viable product, like what's the minimum viable presence you need to have? So that's all stuff I'm sure we can talk about, and we have talked about in the past too, like a lot about like demo or die, a lot about pitching and presenting, a lot about this. So if that's of interest to people, we can focus on that. But I'm sure there's some things that will like inherently come up too.
It'd be a good idea would be like to have an actual demo and like go through how demo or die works in the meeting. Not this week, maybe, but like another week where we set aside maybe like the whole hour for that or part of the hour.
Yeah, and like I think like it can be tailored very much to open source or software, or like developing a digital product, developing a digital thing of whatever. It can be website, it can be presenting an idea. And I think one of the biggest, like, that would be good to do, and it will give us opportunity to elaborate on knowing kind of where you are in the process of the demo or die thing. Which demo or die is sort of this old term that's slightly different. Maybe it's demo or deploy now, and we can talk about that later. Bradley can mention that if you want to get into it. Oh, what's that?
It's from MIT, from the whole media lab way of they do things, because it's very much unique to the
Yeah.
media web.
And it's very, and we've had a lot of discussions in the past internally in this group or in related groups about like there's sort of demo or die as this public facing kind of almost like I almost think of it like defensive driving or like self defense, like when someone's coming at you with a question or a funding opportunity or hey, justify why we're caring about what you're doing, that you kind of that's kind of like where some of the, for lack of better terms, urgency I guess comes from. But then internally we've talked about like how do you cultivate environments where people can practice and train those things that aren't, because you have to have a cultivating space for people to grow their ideas and their skills at talking about what's happening or being able to explain in a safer environment, because you don't want to you know just be throwing it at the wolves of like someone who's going to be deciding your funding, or if your department goes away, or maybe it's not like if you're replaced by AI, like whatever, justifying. You need to have a building up space. Um,
Yeah.
so we've talked a lot about that in the past, and that will come up too, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think that's good. Now, another thing that came up when you were giving your update was you were showing that first example of what was it? What did they call it? Cultural computing
Oh
and
yeah,
some of that. Yeah.
little
So
slot thing. Yeah.
yeah. So it reminds me. I've been going through the GSoC projects from years past, and so we have some. I've forgotten how many different things we had represented in there. Like we had, of course, been doing the open source sustainability project for a while. Been doing the DevoGraph for a while, but then we get further back in time, and we start to hit on some of the older projects that we haven't talked about in a long time. One of those is sort of the way that we've approached cultural evolution or culture in the group. And so we have this computational set of approaches that we've presented on in the past to different conferences, and I just kind of haven't we haven't really driven it forward in the last several years, but it actually might be worth revisiting. Um, so the first one, of course, are the contextual geometric structures, which we had two GSoC students working on in 2018. So that was back before even the Brainberg vehicles, and that was I'm working on a graphic for this, so I'll lay that
Cool.
out later. But that's so there's actually some work that's been done on that. And then of course we were doing things cultural phylogenetic work that we were doing more recently, but this didn't involve GSoC. This was just some work we had presented to one of the Cultural Revolution conferences. And so this is something that, maybe we could revisit as, it's like, again, like one of these things where you do something for a while and you put it aside and you want to have a good representation of it. So maybe you can revisit it where you can show other people what was there and then how you can improve that project. And if you have a good sort of portal to that, it can refresh your memory. It can be, accessible for future collaboration and so forth.
And I would think like, especially for what I think is the most interesting and the hardest and perhaps the most aspirational in some ways type of work, which is like this undisciplinary work. It's a different level of, because you will put things down and walk away from them, and months will pass. And then if you like, the easier it is to reference it later. It's sort of this. It actually it actually is like an extended version of what we talked about in the event yesterday, the cultural computing, and that was about rap and language, it was an art form, whatever, and way of doing stuff. But it's similar to our longstanding discussions about like twirly birds and these like falling ideas that you try to catch and then assemble, and then you can come back to them later, or try to, how can you come back and access them later? So that's you know um, I will just say, particularly if you're doing something that's interdisciplinary or at a cutting edge, which a lot of things are now in sort of the AI applicate, like a lot of fruit in the AI space is both going backwards to reintegrate things that weren't really integrated the first time things were developed, or just bridging interdisciplinary gaps. So like, how do you do that? Um, I think that's a whole other layer that's not really talked about, but it's something that's part of why, like, I think it was the Active Inference Institute a while ago. The last time I presented there, it was like we had to talk about like how do you do like project management in like highly innovative. And a lot of things are innovation and development. Like when you're doing interdisciplinary research work in these fields that aren't established, it's a different kind of dimension of challenges. So um, more about that later.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it's great. Great. Thank you, Jesse, for
And
revisiting that and talking
in the
about.
background, and we can move on. In the background, if you see my face is looking like exasperated, it's because I I just updated a bunch of Google Summer Code stuff, and now it's like not running in a way I can show you. So I'm trying to fix that. Maybe you can show it in a little bit, but I'm gonna be troubleshooting in the background.
Okay, that sounds good. It's like Morgan wants to.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Or should I? Yep.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say I've been making some updates to what was called the organoid um, HGX benchmark. And I've given it a new name to reflect a bit more of a kind of like larger project goals. So it is now called the anatomical compiler. And it still has as a part of it to um, go through organoid data sets. Yes, I'm taking it from Levin, um, and and following some threads from Davies in Edinburgh, who Levin has written papers with, who talks about synthetic morphology. Um, so the hypergraph library was being used for this kind of like regulome analysis, right? What Davies kind of helps put that in context is this kind of larger program of really understanding um, the, the foundations of this kind of genetic control. Okay, and so what you'll see there is kind of like more module analysis. Module analysis, as well as like breaking up the genome into these three classes of modules. But what I've also added is data sets that focus on the bioprinting as it relates to this same program, where it's like what you get going from 2D culture to a 3D culture. How does the transcriptional expression change, right? And how certain researchers are focused on like improving the 3D culture to get more functional tissue targets, right? Whether that be like natural targets or whether that's like synthetic, So I mean, well, yeah, we'll call it synthetic, and but like whether that's trying to get it to be more like you know, tissue that you see in animals, or whether you've got some new goals that you want to set for that, which comes back to Levin's anatomical compiler, which is like, hey, if we knew what these rules were, then we could say like, we want something that does this, and uh, yeah. So if give me a second, and I can just show you. And again, this is um, okay, start screen share. Yeah. So uh, yeah. So you can see here, and then this includes a paper in it that is also generated. But as you see here, this covers some of the work that we've been doing. Like this is the group in Carnegie Mellon that we went to go visit, and we took their particular technique at doing this collagen bioprinting. And then some of this regulome inference is kind of what I'd started with for the hypergraph network, and then I've connected it with both modularity in theoretical biology, as well as identifiability, which is something that I actually got from the biological cybernetics lab at UCLA. So there's some cool algebra in terms of like, are we able to actually do any of this in terms of some of the modeling work, and yeah. So everything is here in terms of running it, as well as just adding more data sets and more examples for again, kind of going through learning different examples and computational work that you can do with publicly available data sets. And then one last thing that I've added, I don't know why my arrow is getting so big there, but so tried to connect this with I generated a new version of Betsy, which is Levin's bioelectric modeling software, and to actually come up with a way to, can you do a model that allows you to change the electric field and then predict the patterns of development from that? Or the reason that Jack's control is in there is, of course, can you find the control points to drive development in the directions that you want? So just wanted to say that, like, this continues my agentic programming. I'm almost at the end of my fellowship, and but we got some really great examples here that I think are really promising to actually connect our wet lab work to our computational work, which would be the that would just be perfect if we could actually make that loop.
Yeah, this is wonderful. I like it. So this is where you would, so you're like, to test this out, you take like some data set as a benchmark. You use it. Yeah.
I mean, I like what I really want to see, and like the questions will probably be very small, right?
Yeah.
like not really, foundational questions, but like, can we come around to the computational models saying like, hey, what the models need now is for you to actually go collect data in the wet lab,
Yeah.
right, and see, like again, like I think it will be, it's the where I'm hoping to make some connection or make a full loop is around kind of like both the materials and, so some of the scaffolds, some of the cell types, and of course how we do the actual print, right? So we have flow channels and things like that. Again, this is all Carnegie Mellon's work, right? But it's just like we print microfluidic chips out of collagen, and then we perfuse both cells as well as say signal factors, right? And then what we get in as we allow those to develop, is the question is, can we predict what that will be, right? and if we make those cell types very simple, or like very small in number, and we control the physics, we control the scaffold, right? Like can we make simple predictions from that, right? And yeah, so like the anatomical compiler is I'm just trying to bring all those different computational threads together. But the cool thing being that like there's already some work in this direction, and the nice thing being that the connection with the bioelectric fields, is something that we can already, there's already some publicly available data, because so many of these tissue engineering groups are focused on the heart. So that's kind of cool, as well as like it's another interesting dimension that you can actually add to these, in terms of in addition to the scaffold and in addition to flow being adding physics forces that actually shape development, having electric currents or modifying the actual ion channels. That the Levin way is modifying the ion channels, but like some of these tissue engineering groups that don't know 11 are already doing things like just having current flowing through the chip to get effects, and that's also really interesting. Right? Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, it's great. I like this work, and yeah. So your fellowship is who's sponsoring the fellowship, and why did they decide to found this fellowship?
Well, so a couple things. I mean, it's a San Francisco group. They're called Worldwide Studios. They run a number of events and programs here. One of which is really focused on agentic development, right? So this is I don't want to say it's like a group that's interested in running an incubator, but like there's a lot of groups in San Francisco that are incubator adjacent.
Right.
like they kind of do, but they might just not want to call it an incubator. Yeah, an incubator means that the definition is like you actually have like a $10 million fund.
Yeah.
This is how do you bootstrap an incubator?
Right. That's the GoPro challenge that I've had. Is like, well, we're not really having a bunch of money, but we're doing incubator-like stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
So here at so this is very much the other thing I like about this is really a biopunk project, right? I mean, this is we can actually use the wet lab here to address experimental questions, and and uh, uh, but yeah, we've been running Biopunk House, or I should say, Elliot has been running Biopunk House, which is a great example of how to do that without a without a big bankroll, and yeah, so. But like I said, at the beginning of the year, I really wanted to dive into agentic. Like what are these agentic tools able to deliver, right? So I've seen I've seen what I can do in my own field of neuroimaging in terms of rewriting analysis tools, and and I've learned a lot about um, again some of the design choices that I chose, that I made for the project around composable functions and differentiable functions. Um, give these tools, um, an effectiveness that is novel. You know, um, uh, so yeah, like um, we'll see. I think in terms of meeting my fellowship goals, which were um, supposed to be more outwards in terms of producing educational material or like an educational, it was kind of an ed tech. I didn't realize how ed tech focused they were going to be. Um, uh, and I'm not sure I've met those requirements of it.
Oh, okay.
I mean, well, like we've got a separate, like I work with a team, and so I'm a builder for a team that has education researchers, right? So they're leading that focus, but I think it's a bigger question of how does this become a teaching tool.
Right.
That I think is definitely a really interesting question. Um, uh,
If that's something that like I had to handle something and I kind of missed some of the setup for this, but I remember the ed tech stuff. If that's something that you're trying to do with it and you want people to like talk about that with, I know you're like in the education and AI stuff from what you're doing, but like I'm I'm doing some similar things, so I'm super interested in like talking about how do you make it education, like so that's
yeah, yeah. I mean, I really do, and so this does connect. Like, I haven't forgot about, I call it ALF, but it's the active inference framework stuff. I'm still doing the textbook group, and and they're developing software, and I think that's a nice, because it also has a group of people that are really engaged with it, that are at all sorts of different levels, that I would like to, I mean, I'm definitely hoping that there'll be some people here at Biopunk that will be interested in the anatomical compiler. I mean, in terms of things that they want to do around tissue engineering. Um, but the Active Inference Institute has like a large group of people that are are actually trying to be students on some pretty deep computational material. I think that would be a great place to focus around, like they're using agentic tools to develop the code, but the question is, how can we actually make that more instructive for those learning, like learning and getting a really deep understanding of the concepts and um, their ability to apply these tools in their own domains or their questions of interest, right? like anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's good. And I am interested in the EdTech component. Maybe one day we can do maybe next week we can do a longer talk about just the EdTech aspect of it, because I think that's interesting. I mean, there's just this angst about like how to use agentic tools or vibe coding or whatever you want to talk about in education, and like the administrators and universities are always pushing the tools on people, and it's kind of like there are all these instructors and people in departments are like, well, how do we use this, or why do we want to use this? It's like this disconnect between like this imperative to like be sort of hip and then like the actual usefulness and having use cases right there ready to go. So it's a tension that
It,
um
absolutely right. I mean, it's Princeton's talking about bringing back proctored exams,
yeah.
right? But it's funny though, because of course how these are sold to us is still is like an augmentative tool,
Right.
So it is funny. um uh I think I forget Boris, I forget the Claude Code developer's name, but it's like Boris Chesnak or something like that. Like, it's not that, but it's close.
Yeah.
His last name begins with a C or something like that. But it's interesting because somebody found a really old project that he wrote like as a 18-year-old, and it was basically programming a Texas Instruments calculator, and I was just thinking about that, like how that has changed in my lifetime, from calculators being banned in exams
Right.
to calculators being allowed in exams. And they're yeah, so it's like I don't we can talk about it when it's the right forum,
Right.
but like it's a really as someone, I bring this up in our EdTech meetings, which is like I bring up foreign language learning, where
Mhm.
it's just like like, yes, I can make my phone be a universal translator, but nothing nothing gives me the experience of actually learning another language.
Right.
Starting to dream in that, and feeling the how the world changes when you actually learn that, right? Like and we want to say that computational um what's the three brown one blue, is it
Mm-hmm.
what was his course called? He says like computational thinking or something like that. Like we want that to be something that you kind of like learn like a language too.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, we'll get there. Um, um, I've if anybody's interested, like I would love to like go through these notebooks and see, are these useful in terms of you know. Um, I saw a project on Hacker News that I'm gonna try and check out, but it's like can I make not only glossaries but like make flashcards for like all the topics that are come up, for like all the vocab that people need to understand, all that kind of like concepts that connect this to open source textbooks and things like that, like how to again like generate the material, and and give people the tools that work well for people to ingest and really um, you know have that material be a part of their their new approach to working on problems.
I'm sure we have other things we need to talk about, but very quickly, I will say I'm interested in that space and doing things regarding the old school frontier map project, which is about getting people to understand fields of development or like how various topics, interdisciplinary topics emerge, right? And then also, I'm physically doing right now a lot of experimentation. I'm sure this is part of what you've done with all of the Gen AI stuff, but like basically, like we're even relating um, I say LLM, but like Claude and Notion. Like, how do getting databases to interact with knowledge bases, but also in a pedagogical way where, um, you know, is the information being presented both like grounded to sources that you have vetted or tied, and then like what the topic from the last time was at the MIT Aha group was like the scaffolded learning of where the individual is. So like putting all that together is a very interesting space. So
Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting what, I'm still seeing hallucinations. I'm still seeing, it's like if you don't sit on these projects like an open claw, where it's just like you find me those references, find me those references, find me those references, and then it's just like it's like a Rick and Morty episode where it's just like on the 200th time the system's like, hey, you know what, these references don't exist.
Yeah.
and then it's just like, let me now do it a different way.
Yeah.
and um so but again, like what it can't hallucinate, or um every one of these has to, don't use simulations, only use real data.
Yeah.
Right, like it's easy for it to generate problems for itself that are actually superficial.
Right.
uh, anyway, but yeah,
Yeah.
I still wanna be working with the groups that are trying to find like how we use this well.
Yeah.
You know, like again, like Jeremy Howard is like, I like to keep as in my sights as someone who's like, he doesn't buy any of this AI bullshit, but he's like absolutely wants to make it work for humans,
Right.
right? you know, and yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and like and I think there's some other good people trying to do that. Yeah, we'll get there.
All right. So yeah, thank you, Morgan. Yeah.
And I put in a link for Jess on visual impairment.
Okay.
That's the institute here in San Francisco that I used to work at.
Okay. So, Chris or Ashu, did you have any updates or things you wanted to mention?
No, I'm just like want to like hear what everybody thinks and want to get some ideas. Just like
I'm not hearing.
yeah, I'm not hearing.
you're fine.
I can hear. Yeah.
Oh, that's me.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, like I'm like still learning, and so I think the experience here is really important to me. So yeah, I did hear a lot of good stuff here.
Oh,
today.
good.
I think it's always important, especially with the first few times. Like everybody who just came in today, like if you have no idea what Morgan's talking about at all relative to things, or like what I said, and you haven't been here for a while, like it's fine. Like don't feel like you have to take notes on everything that was said, because it was a lot of free, like it's mostly referencing past conversations and other things. So like if you don't have context, that's fine. And also like feel free to write stuff in the chat that you do want to talk about, or if you have a question you do want to hear about, you can always, especially when we're doing like these general wide ranging updates, especially Morgan and myself, um, can be carried away on things that are tangents. So your ability, I'm promoting your agency and empowering you to steer the vessel as need be. I try to do that sometimes. I try to assist Bradley in keeping things on task. Doesn't always happen. And especially when, like, right now, there's no set agenda for this particular meeting today, right now. So that's why it's like really, we're 40 minutes in, we're 50 minutes in. What have we talked about that's about GSoC directly? Nothing. Okay, and just saying, like, just transparently saying, like, that's what happened today. That's not what's going to be happening every day. So
It's open source, but I mean, I think we've talked about open source today. So,
yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to something I want to talk about that I found interesting. So, yeah, I found something interesting, and it kind of ties into one of the projects that we've had for GSoC. So, this is the open source sustainability project, and we know this project as kind of many of you know it from the repository. Fewer people know kind of the history of how this came to be. So back in 2021, 2022, we thought about different things about open source communities and how those are sort of instantiated and how they can maybe run more efficiently. And remember, this is before any of the agentic coding or anything else. This is like kind of where you have contributors coming into a community. They are contributing things. You have maintainers, maybe who are accepting contributors' contributions, and you have this sort of what we might call self-organizing or self-sustaining work, or a contribution model where you don't really have like managers. You don't really have set goal. You have set goals, but they're kind of based on what gets contributed. And so that's kind of the way opens. That's sort of I don't want to say the magic, but like sort of the secret sauce of open source communities, and how there's this, this sort of hype around them that they're fundamentally different, say, from like software teams where you have hierarchical management, where people are trying to like, build these really advanced roadmaps, and they're trying to, like, they assign a team to every component to nail down everything. You need to have detailed plans and everything else. So not to say that open source communities don't have roadmaps and plans, but you can build theoretically a community that kind of self-organizes from a bunch of contributors to just build things that are based on maybe like a couple issues you put out there. So that's the idea. And so we kind of built from that. We said, what if we could simulate that? And people have tried to simulate it before, but we want to kind of build a model for simulating a lot of that, and see what happens. So we started off with sort of a framework where we had an agent based layer of the simulation where you could simulate multiple individuals, multiple agents doing things, interacting, and having that represented as sort of an agent based model where each agent has rules, interaction rules with their neighbors, and then you get these emergent patterns that come out of that. But then each agent then would have something that they were working from. So we started off in the first year with a reinforcement learning model and an active inference model. If you remember Brian McCorkle, he was working on the active inference component. And it's basically the cognition of the agents. So what are the agents? How do they think through a problem, or how do they think through an issue? How do they approach it? So those two models, and active inference model has sort of been on the shelf for a while. The reinforcement learning models, people have picked that up and worked on that for subsequent years. So we had in 2023, in 2024, and in 2025, we had people working on that and refining what that meant in terms of reinforcement learning theory and what the code looked like and everything else. And then, of course, in 2024, we also had the large language models component, which, of course, Chris knows from where we had like a large language model that would generate issues that could refine some of the sort of language used in the project or the text that was presented to simulated contributors and all of that. So we had this large language model component that kind of fit into that. So all of that is just kind of this framework for simulating this process. And so really it's not just about open source communities, it's about collective behavior and modeling collective behavior. So this is our repository. So it's very disorganized on the surface. But basically, if I go through this repository, we can see that every year for GSoC, we have these annual kind of directories. We have for 2022, for 2023. So you notice for 2022, we're just getting started. This is where we sort of established an approach. 2023 was where we have a virtual reality project in here, but we have this open source sustainability stub here. For 2024, we get the large language models. 2025, we also get the reinforcement learning models. So we have these this code and sort of legacy code at this point. And one of the problems with doing things from GSoC is that we get people doing their projects and they kind of go off in different directions somewhat. So we have to kind of bring them back together later. But at least we have some starting point. So this is a conversation for another time. But when we manage these repositories, we're really kind of managing them from these projects and then maybe bringing them back together, through some sort of synthesis, saying like, okay, VD Rahira worked on Sustain Hub. There was some work done in 2023 and 2024 on actually 2022 as well on reinforcement learning. How do we bring those together? This is the calculator project, I think, which someone was working on. This was an example of sort of the one of the tasks that you would have this community do to build a virtual calculator. And, there were a number of tasks attached to that. So there are all sorts of things in this repository that we have. But that's still kind of not as integrated as we'd like it. So how do we kind of integrate that? And then how do we kind of get people or maybe simulate that upper layer of the agent-based model? Because I didn't show you the agent-based contributions, but they're kind of embedded in some of these repositories. Like 2023 was a year where we were doing a lot of integration. RV Rajagopalan was working on integrating the agent-based models with some of the reinforcement learning. And I know that Kavya Zala had proposed a method he was a contributor at MISA, which of course is the open source agent-based model platform. So he was interested in agent-based models and the large language models and that sort of thing. So you can bring in people who kind of know how to integrate that, and that's one way to do this. But another thing that I found recently is that we can use agents, and we can use agents in two ways. We can use agents to sort of do some of this work of integration and synthesis and kind of guiding us towards the future. So we get people who create things and they kind of somewhat go off in different directions and they require some synthesis, so we can use agents on the back end to bring those things back together and find the ways in which to bring those to sort of back into a common framework. Or sometimes we can use this community of agents as the simulator itself. So this is something that I found. This is a repository from I Am Luke the Dev called Claw3D. And remember, I said for the open source sustainability project, we have these agent-based models at sort of as the top layer, and then the computational engines of large language models and reinforcement learning and active inference algorithms as this lower layer that generates the behavior of the agents. Another way to do this, of course, is to have this upper layer composed of a 3D model where you have agents doing things And these are computational agents doing things in this space where they're interacting. And so I found this interesting. This is a repository used for OpenClaw agents where they have this office for their AI team. And so this is a 3D virtual office for AI agents you run on your own infrastructure. Instead of watching automation through dashboards and logs, you walk through a live 3D office where your agents collaborate, review code, run stand ups, ship pull requests, and execute tasks side by side. So they're doing all this stuff that open source teams do, from sort of conception to shipping a product or deploying something. And so, the idea here, and I remember um, Morgan asked me once, what's the difference between like what OpenClaw is doing with these agent teams and what you're doing with open source sustainability? And I told him that, open source sustainability, we're trying to simulate a lot of this. We're not trying to produce anything. We just want to see how those teams behave and how to do that more effectively. And so this is interesting because this is generating these virtual environments are generated for agent teams, but we can also use this kind of approach where we have this 3D workspace for physical teams. And when you're dealing with distributed open source teams, you're not working in an office, you're working in many different sites around the world. And you might think, well, then we don't need to worry about modeling the office, but actually we need to model sort of the embodiment of those contributors. So modeling like where they are in the world, or what kind of environment they're working on their code in. Those things are important, or what their communication pattern is between each other. So do they use like text, or do they use video meetings, or do they kind of interact through like just through issues and pull requests? Those things can be modeled in this 3D way as well. So this is the reason I bring this up, aside from being really interesting as a sort of an add-on to OpenClaw, is that you can use this, this is just another way to build that top layer, to build that layer of um, the how the agents are interacting. So this is, already built. So this is something that you can just deploy, where you can modify from existing code, and it makes it easier to sort of figure out how to deploy it for what we might want to do. So this is kind of my, just thinking about some of this agentic coding and how this fits into some of our open source initiatives. I actually today, but I'm going to save it for next week, I want to talk about how agentive coding is sort of wreaking havoc in a lot of open source projects, because that is a thing. um, you can imagine that open source projects is, like I said, there's sort of the norm is to have humans interacting, and some of the imperfections of that process. But then you start throwing in either agent generated code or agents that are artificial themselves, and that adds another dimension to this, where you have maybe agents that don't behave like regular contributors, or they generate a lot of code that isn't great for what it needs to do. Like, agents tend to generate a lot of code, and then you have to kind of sift through it to find the nuggets that you need for the project. And that's something we'll talk about next week. But I want to hear people's thoughts on what I had just
It's a
presented.
really fascinating. The last thing you mentioned, and we won't go this. We can table this for next week, but just to kind of pin in this and come back to it, it's come up a lot in some of the Diginest and other discussion groups in like JoePro, because it's almost like a little more concrete example of instantaneous developing software when that's happening, but the same there's a congruent problem or shape of a problem in like when you're having um like some Anthropic papers, which is fine, but like many maybe not Anthropic papers, but other related papers are using AI generated material that, oh, we've using generative AI, we've made this thing, and then we're going to have AI agents evaluate the thing. So it's this AI agent mediated creation and then evaluation, and it's like, okay, if you can do that very well in certain ways, but just like making pull requests and evaluating if pull requests, if you're having too much automation, then the gap between somebody who actually knows what's really going on, it can get really crazy. Things can blow up, and then it's like you just don't like you don't really even know what's happening if it goes a certain way. So that's like an interesting parallel between like designing and doing research and then making and evaluating and going over pull requests. So we can pick that up next time. Another thing I wanted to say quickly was I have a very small like philosophy of history internship that I very minimally advertised, and someone found it on the internet and reached out, and they're a student in let's say a student in Asia who is doing it their doctorate studies in like philosophy, history of science, and talk about like Kewen and stuff. They reached out to me saying, "Oh, I'm using ABM and agent-based modeling to represent like philosophy of history concepts, kind of like you were saying, having the cognition of the agents." I think he was trying to do a version of that with like concepts and historical like movements and how they related to in an agent-based settings too. That was a really cool. It's almost like not quite cultural stuff from before, but this is like culture as in ideas, perhaps in this philosophy sense. So that maybe we'll talk about that Saturday. But yeah, interesting ways of using like the ABM agent-based modeling, and then also agentic stuff. So I look forward to that next week here too.
All right. If that's all, then for today, we'll call it a meeting. Thank you for attending.
Yep, and hopefully see some of you guys tomorrow. If not next week, I'm sure I'll have a lot more to say then.
Yeah.
Take care.
Take care.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye. Thank you.